This episode contains spoilers for Spec Ops: The Line. As such, this episode contains scenes of excessive violence. Hello and welcome back to the Games Club. This episode we'll be discussing our final thoughts on this month's game, the 2012 shooter by Yager Development, Spec Ops: The Line.
So maybe before we get too far into it, we should talk a little bit about the different ways we approached it. This was something that you suggested we play, having played it before, and I believe you went in cold. This has since become a game that is known for having something to say.
Yes.
I came into this having not played it before, but having read Brendan Keough's Killing is Harmless and Tom Bessel's piece for Grantland, and that was several years ago. So I knew that this was a something to say game, like in all caps, but I hadn't yet experienced it for myself.
You were the one who suggested it to me.
Oh, was I?
Yeah, or maybe you just mentioned it or something, and all I knew going in was that it was a shooter that was a bit more than just your average Call of Duty-esque warfare in the desert kind of thing.
It was an off-brand Call of Duty.
When I first played the game, I was quite surprised with what it did. To be completely honest, I mean, like I said, I went in cold, so I didn't expect anything, which I'm sure is completely different from you because the book that you read. The most surprising thing for me when I first played the game was Walker's deteriorating state and how that kind of affected the game. I'm not really good at these types of games, the kind of cover-based shooters. I'm actually quite bad at them for the most part. So I died a lot, and that means that I saw the loading screen a lot. I loved what they did with the loading screen, and that it would be like random gun facts and how to help, you know, your gameplay. And then suddenly, do you feel like a hero yet?
Yeah, how many Americans have you killed today? I know this was one of them.
Exactly.
If you were, one of them was really blunt. It was like, if you were a better person, you wouldn't be here.
Exactly.
Yeah, I really like the way they did that. One of the things I was kind of trying to think, I was thinking about it when I was playing it in reference to like Bioshock Infinite and The Last of Us, which are also games that tried to say things to various degrees of success.
Yes.
2 years ago. And kind of thinking how this did it. A lot of things that they tried to do better. And part of it was how that creeping feeling of kind of questioning what you're doing and why you're there is fully integrated into everything that makes the game, for the most part.
Exactly.
What it is. It's on the loading screens. It's in what you're seeing. It's kind of trying to recontextualize what you're doing. I'm still not convinced it was completely successful, but it was really interesting.
No, I completely agree, because particularly with Bioshock Infinite and Last of Us, I know that the big problem that you had with Last of Us is the way that violence was portrayed, as it didn't always feel as necessary as the game tried to implore you that it was.
Right.
And this game, it talks about violence, but it also talks about it in a way that's like, this isn't necessary.
There's always a choice, I think, is the big... Lugo says it first, and it comes up a lot. There is always a choice. And It's interesting the way the game plays with that, because there was one instance in particular when Walker hears Conrad telling him he has to choose between the thief and the soldier that punished him. I tried to walk away from that scene. And Adams, I think, was shot. And so I turned around like, oh, I can't just leave. That's not an option here. Which maybe what they're trying to say is, well, yeah, there is always an option. You could turn it off. You could walk away, literally. Which, that I thought was a very interesting way of kind of playing with that. And there's several scenes where you could potentially just walk away. Like, I think from Riggs, when he's burning to death, he's asking you to kill him and you can just walk away. Which I ended up doing.
And there's also that scene with the lynching, where I didn't realize you could walk away, because I waited and I was like, hey guys, can you let me pass? You know?
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, fuck, what am I supposed to do? And then I was talking to my coworker who had played it, and he was like, yeah, I didn't. And I was like, what? That was an option?
Yeah, what did he do?
I have no idea.
Well, what did you do?
I just tried going through and I couldn't, so I think I meleeed.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing. I tried to do like a shove off option, and that didn't work.
Yeah.
And then like Adam started shooting the air. I was like, oh, I bet I could have done that too. There are several moments where I thought, well, maybe if I pressed harder, I would have that option just to walk away. I thought that was a very interesting kind of line for a game to toe, because we make a lot of to do about, you know, the choice in games and how it's not really choice. I'm not sure if the game prodded that as much as it could have, but it was definitely an interesting conversation to bring up, especially when this game was made, which was several years ago before we had our Infinite number of lighthouses.
Another thing that you mentioned is how the game kind of goads you into walking away from the game itself, which I think is really quite fascinating. That is something that is unique to video games as a medium.
Well, I mean, how much of, like, the dialogue around classic and cult films and things is about, oh, you know, so many people walked away from this in the first screening, it was so horrifying, or, like, walked out on the play or the performance or whatever. And you don't really have that in games. It's like...
Progression is such an important part of video games.
For some reason, that isn't a measure of content or part of, I guess, the legacy of a game in the way that it is about certain films or performances that are difficult. And I wonder if this is sort of kind of prodding that same, I guess, beast, so to speak, the kind of idea of make you so disgusted with it that you do want to walk away, because as the game tells you, if you're a better person, you wouldn't be here. And there were some points where it directly calls out video games, and there's one that was where I think it was either Conrad or Darden was saying over the radio, you know, this one is rated E for everyone, or why are you so violent? Oh, it must be the video games. Again, I'm not totally sold that works, but it's interesting to see the conversation that comes out of that, I guess.
I'd say it's more effective than most games, where, like Bioshock Infinite and The Last of Us, it's very much about trying to make it more like a movie and trying to say something in, like, the narrative, but it doesn't really tie it together with gameplay, which is what you found lacking in Last of Us. But in this game, they do try to make it more an all-around package to tell the same idea, instead of just relying on film techniques.
Right, yeah, a character says one thing in cutscene, and then you do other things, which this game has a lot of the chest-high wall shooting galleries. And in the beginning, at least, it felt very...
generic?
Yeah, I guess generic would be the way to do it. It didn't seem like it was pushing anything. It was just very, this is a shooter. Okay, you're shooting things. And I'm not sure if it really functioned in a way that helped the rest of the game. Like, I would think in a better game, it would kind of lull you into this sense of, like, this sense of flow and this cycle, and then turn that cycle upside down, which it kind of does. But I struggled, I guess, to come down on whether or not it actually succeeded in that, because it was so monotonous in the beginning. I'm not sure if it really harnessed the power of that monotony in the same way that, say, like, Papers, Please does. In Papers, Please, you know, the monotony of the job becomes part of the horror. In this, I didn't feel that while I was in those, you know, shooting ranges, basically. And, of course, one thing that is brought up in both the book that we referenced, the Grantland piece, and also occurs in The Last of Us, is the stunt casting of Nolan North. Goes a long way to sell it, I think. So this obviously comes right after Uncharted is, like, the big game to be, basically. And he kind of functions in two ways in those games. And Last of Us is obviously a game for the same developer as Uncharted, so there's a very, I feel, conscious effort to cast him as the most un-Nathan Drake character in the game, which, if Nathan Drake is a swashbuckling hero, his character in The Last of Us is a cannibalistic pedophile. And Spec Ops kind of casts him as his usual Nathan Drake character, and then kind of starts to deconstruct it in an interesting way, because one of the big criticisms of Uncharted, like, the big one that comes up a lot, is the idea that when he's breaking into the museum in the beginning of Uncharted 2, he's like, I will not shoot these guards, you know, they're innocent, they don't have weapons. And then as soon as you take control of the character, he throws a guard into the ocean.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said about the fact that Uncharted says one thing and then makes him into a cold-blooded killer, basically. There's a part at the end of Uncharted 2 and the main bad guy yells, you know, how many men have you killed today? And you can bring up the stats, like pressing pause in that moment, and see just how many men, you know, Nathan Drake has killed in his time while you've been playing this game. And there is definitely a sense of that in Spec Ops, and sort of forcing you to confront that fact, not only in, like, the loading screens where it asks, like, how many Americans have you killed, but having him come face to face with the civilian victims of his actions, which is, I thought that was a really brilliant sequence, having them kind of just be these faceless outlines on a screen, and then having to see the actual human costs, like, in person. Seeing how he just kind of pushes back a bit against all that and becomes that ruthless killer and almost embraces it in a way, even while saying on one hand, we're doing what's right, I had no choice, and then he's yelling while you're shooting people, you know, another one fucking dead or something. He just gets more animalistic and starts growling his lines. It's just a really good performance and a very deliberate, I think, casting that works really well.
One of the things that Spec Ops, when it was being created, that makes me feel like a lot of these decisions are deliberate. I mean, it's obviously very deliberate. But they say that they took a lot of inspiration from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which is a very controversial book. And it was one that I actually have never read, but it was one that in my comparative literature courses I'd always hear about when we were talking about like Orientalism or colonialism.
It definitely, I mean, it's important for a war game, especially with like Call of Duty continuing to be the juggernaut that it is, showing, hey, American soldiers going overseas, not actually wanted by those people.
Yeah, not the best idea. But then again, I don't think that, you know, having a sequence where you're firing into a group of civilians and...
Most of the time they're either charred corpses or they have bags over their heads. And it's like they literally don't even have faces half the time.
I think it's interesting that you kind of get the choice to save civilians. And then later you get a similar choice, but it's more as framed as a... don't shoot the civilians.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, they start... That's kind of after their descent into action hero hell, where it's just like, everybody is my enemy. And again, I think it is important for this medium to have a story about soldiers where they realize they're actually the bad guys. But I wonder if they couldn't have also humanized the population more. The fact that they explicitly state that this is all happening in his head. That was something I'd forgotten about, and that surprised me, because one of the things I think that something like The Last of Us and Bioshock Infinite tries to get away with is being purposely vague. And this was just, there is no question that this is all in Walker's head. He's done all these horrible things, and he's used really shitty justification for it.
You know, say what you will about, you know, it was all in my head or it was all a dream kind of... narratives, but I feel like there's a lot to be said for not leaving that ambiguity. I mean, there's still some ambiguity in the game. I mean, a lot happens in it, but...
And there's multiple endings, too.
Yeah. But this is a game that is very intentionally wanting you to look at what this genre's version of a hero is or could be, and what that means.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it. It wants to examine what it means to be a hero, and how that might not actually be heroic.
Yeah. And I think that plays out a lot in the way the end of the game takes place. And there are multiple endings for the game.
Which I'd totally forgotten.
Which ending did you get?
I'm not sure. Walker survived.
Oh, he did?
He was the only one, and a rescue, I don't know my military terms.
A rescue team.
A group of guys.
A group of dudes came.
Yeah, dudes arrived to rescue him, and he's just kind of standing out there, shell-shocked, holding a weapon. And you have the option, they approach you like, drop your weapon, we're here to help. There's like, press X to drop your weapon. And I did. And it's funny, if you see my footage, I like swing the camera hard to the left where like nobody's standing, like, oh my god, if they even fire when I press X, like, you know, in Portal where it's like, press A to, or whatever to speak, and you jump.
Yeah.
I was like, this is going to be a press X to open fire. So, like, I swung the camera and press X, and he dropped the weapon, and he gets kind of taken home, and he's just shell-shocked. And I think something happens effective. I think the soldier says something like, how did you survive? And he says, who says I did? I think, however, my kitchen timer went off at that point. So I kind of missed what he said.
Brownies are far more important than the final line.
They are.
Were they brownies, seriously?
No, they were cookies.
Oh, okay. I feel like everybody deserves some cookies after beating this game. I actually had Walker shoot himself.
Oh, yeah, I had him shoot the reflection.
Oh, yeah.
Which I wasn't sure. That was one of the things where I was a little bit about. Because I wasn't sure if that was him, like, denying his actions or what. But from the way he was kind of shell-shocked at the end, I don't think... I think he accepted his actions.
Yeah.
But so you had him shoot himself, so does he die?
He does. And his corpse is right next to Conrad. And then you hear that, like, it kind of goes over burning scenery and you hear that original broadcast of Conrad's, and then it just kind of fades to black.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to even mention, I love the fact that near the end you repeat the beginning, the opening sequence. Mm-hmm. I was unsure a lot through a lot of the shooting segments because, like, I don't know if this is going to come back in any way. But as soon as that came back, I was like, oh, okay, they know what they're doing. Because that totally plays into, like, the very game idea of repetition.
Yeah.
And kind of, you're supposed to get better as you keep doing it. And this is just like, you know, they are at their lowest point and, oh, shit, we're going to start again.
Yeah.
That was a great moment.
I'm not sure what drove me to kill Walker. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if it was guilt or if I just didn't want him to get out of there alive. I don't know.
It is really important to kind of think about, because of the things that Walker says in isolation seem harmless, and they're exactly what other heroes in other games do, just as you mentioned. So, like, we didn't have a choice. Like, how often do you hear that in video games?
All the time.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I think this game was trying to critique. In a lot of ways. And I really think for the most part it succeeds. There's just some little things that just don't quite work.
So that does it for our discussion on Spec Ops: The Line. Now we want to know your thoughts on the game. Are there any other games whose message stands up to scrutiny? We're taking a break from the Games Club until our schedules lighten up, but we invite you to still join us for scripted video essays and gatherings around the digital water cooler. So don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with our newest discussions.
Ah, geez. Where's all this violence coming from, man? Is it the video games? I bet it's the video games.